Hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Rob Lunder from the Edge Marketing Department. A few housekeeping items before we begin. All participants will be on mute for this call. If you have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box located on the right-hand side of your screen. We'll try our best at the end of the presentation to answer as many questions as time allows. Today's webinar is brought to you by Edge by Ascential, formerly BrandView, Clavis Insight, One Click Retail, and Planet Retail R&G. The four companies have joined forces under Ascential PLC with a shared vision to empower brands and retailers with the most comprehensive, accurate, and actionable insights and advisory solutions to grow revenue in an e-commerce-driven marketplace. We partner globally with the world's leading brands and retailers to identify strategies and to provide weekly, daily, and real-time digital shelf performance KPIs, including pricing, promotions, availability, traffic, conversion, sales, and share. You can learn more today by visiting essentialedge.com. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers and my colleagues Doug Koontz and Danny Silverman. Doug is the Director of Content Strategy and Analytics at Edge, leading the organization's global content strategy team. And Danny Silverman is our Chief Marketing Officer here at Edge. He is an established industry thought leader with over 14 years of experience, helping brands grow their online presence and sales. He spent 8 of those years at Johnson & Johnson, where he led their e-commerce strategy. And with that, I will now turn it over to Danny, who will get us started here.
Thanks so much for the introduction, Rob. We'll actually give this to Doug to get us started.
Thank you, Danny. Thank you, Rob. Hello, everyone. As Rob said, my name is Doug Koontz, and I'll be kicking us off here. So, obviously, we're here today to talk about e-commerce, and before we really jump all the way into that, I do want to address the elephant in the room. No, we are not here to advocate for the disappearance of stores altogether. Stores are not going away. But I think if we take away anything here, it's that e-commerce must be a core part of our strategy going forward. And so what you're looking at in our latest forecasts, e-commerce now, as of today, represents about 20% of global global chain retail, and that's only going to increase to 28% by 2023. That big green bar, store-based, is still the majority of sales, but actually what we're seeing is e-commerce now represents the majority of growth around the world. Over the next 5 years, e-commerce in our figures are going to represent 51% of chain retail growth around the world, which is really quite astounding when you consider where we came from even 5 years ago, where e-commerce only represented about 9% of chain retail. So you see the growth rates there in front of you. Obviously, e-commerce about quadruple the rate of store-based growth over the next 5 years, and a lot of that is really driven by third-party marketplaces, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But third-party marketplaces, they are these massive platforms that allow sellers to list products, consumers to come and buy those products, and they take a few percentage points off the top for helping to facilitate that transaction. As you'll see in just a moment, those are really the profound drivers of this e-commerce growth around the world. Third-party marketplaces represent 53% of e-commerce right now. It'll represent about 70% of e-commerce growth over the next 5 years. And so if that's not already in your plan and in your strategy, I'd encourage you all to think about that, and soon, because it is rapidly taking over the world. So as we look at the global landscape of e-commerce, I think what's most profound or what's most interesting is that there's very few places that are actually immune to the effect of e-commerce. Obviously, you see some of the usual suspects here as top e-commerce markets. China, no surprise. USA, no surprise. Some other really big developed markets, the UK, Japan, Germany, and so on. But you also see some emerging and developing markets on this list. India, for one. India is probably the biggest growth opportunity outside of China around the world right now, and they're really in the early stages of e-commerce growth, and so there's massive opportunity there. If you look down those blue bubbles at the bottom of the slide, though, you can see what share of e-commerce represents of chain retail. So when I say chain retail, this excludes the traditional trade, kind of the mom and pop shops and informal markets. But just within the chain retail landscape, which is frankly where most brands generate most of their sales and most of their profits, e-commerce represents a massive share in some of these emerging markets. And so when I say that no place is really immune, we could give you this data for any market around the world, and what you'd see is e-commerce is really stunting the growth of store-based chain retail. And that's fundamentally altering how brands capture growth in some of these geographies that frankly represent the vast majority of growth opportunities, because a lot of Western Europe, North America is flat at best for a lot of people. And so these competitive environments, these markets around the world, there's no place that isn't touched by e-commerce, whether it's home delivery, whether it's click and collect, whether it's some sort of digital influence in the in-store experience. E-commerce, in our belief, and the data really bears this out, is e-commerce is certainly the future. And so all of this e-commerce growth is fundamentally altering the global retail landscape, and in particular reshaping who these top retail customers around the world are. 3 of the 5 biggest customers are predominantly e-commerce players. You can see 2012, there's no Alibaba, there's no Amazon, there's no JD.com. In 2022, Alibaba's the #1 player, Amazon's #3, JD's #4. Someone's actually overtaken Walmart for the first time in decades. And the reality is, if you looked at those growth rates of Alibaba, Amazon, and JD are considerably higher than Walmart and Carrefour as total entities. And so these are the customers that are driving growth. And if we extended the list, there'd be more e-commerce players in the top 10, the top 15, the top 20. And so what this means for us is that the way we go to market is no longer the same. We grew up in an era where you could stick truckloads of products onto a truck, get it to a distribution center, and get it out to a Walmart supercenter or a Carrefour hypermarket, for example. Well, as e-commerce finds new routes to market, they are fundamentally changing how we have to get products to our end consumers. That's introducing a new competitive set that's fundamentally different, whether that's new brands that we have to compete with, or whether that's new retail partners that we haven't worked with in the past. And also when we've got to get these things to our consumers' doorsteps or to get to these shoppers in new ways, it's fundamentally changing the economics of the business model. It was really efficient and really profitable to put something onto a truck, to a warehouse, and then ultimately out to a store. Well, as those shipments get smaller, as those shipments get faster and closer together, I think as you're all experiencing, profitability is an entirely different ballgame. And these issues bring up an entirely new set of capability requirements, totally new set of customers, very different roadmap for growth for both retailers and suppliers to win in this e-commerce-driven world. So what does that really mean for our stores? Well, e-commerce can compete with a lot of those things that stores used to do really well. Stores fundamentally provide price, provide range or assortment, provide proximity, right? Closeness. Well, when you think about e-commerce, other things being equal, what beats getting something dropped off at your doorstep? What beats 10 million, 100 million SKUs online that you can look at while you're sitting on the couch? And particularly when you get some of these competitive 3P marketplaces, what beats the price that someone like Alibaba or Amazon can provide? And so what this means for our traditional store-based customers is that a lot of these historical strengths are at least matched by e-commerce. And so retailers are adapting their store in what we call the store of the future in these four primary ways, right? Experiential, social, frictionless, and curated. And experiential really means, do I give someone a good reason to come to the store, to make it different than just shopping online? That might be services, that might be in-store expertise, that might be some sort of really interesting merchandising or displays. Social is about giving people a reason to dwell in the store. Maybe it becomes part of the community that e-commerce can't replicate. Frictionless, I think, is pretty self-evident to most, where we are providing we're trying to get people in and out of the store as fast as we possibly can, because friction is a killer. If it takes me 45 minutes to go through this store and 10 minutes to check out, you know what? I'll just buy it online. And curated is really about, how do I introduce something new to the shopper that maybe they haven't seen before? How am I really personalized? How do I put products and merchandising in front of a shopper that is really relevant to them and gives them an experience that makes it worth coming back to the store? And so your in-store business is changing, right? Retailers are moving to smaller stores. They're moving to fewer SKUs. The assortment has to change because e-commerce is competing with a lot of these things. And what we see is that both e-commerce and store-based models are kind of converging on one another, right? We used to have what we call omnichannel retailers or physical retailers, where you start with a store, you slowly add some of these e-commerce options, click and collect, home delivery, maybe delivery partnerships like an Instacart, for example. Well, then someone had this wild idea that you can sell stuff online to people and ship it to their doorstep, and so we started doing that as your e-commerce retailers. But over time, you introduce pickup lockers, click and collect, and now even physical stores like Amazon Go, like Hema Markets from Alibaba. And so everything but the physical store really does introduce new profitability issues and requires new skill sets. And some people challenge us sometimes. Maybe the idea of pure play and omnichannel is actually outdated because these things are converging on one another. Well, in some sense, I could agree with that, because you see a lot of similarities between some of the winners now, right? And this is really where industry leaders are headed, right? They're building these digital ecosystems that have massive assortments, tons of services, can collect tons of data. Amazon and Alibaba are a couple of really good examples of this. But some of the key areas here, this expansive value stack, there's lots of touch points. Scale obviously is a huge driver of success of these retailers. But what really makes it special is that they have all these opportunities to collect data and then perfect their business using that data, whether that's personalization, whether that's new services, whether that's new product launches. And then they're constantly pushing the boundaries of innovation. And we believe at Edge that we need to know how to work with these customers, because I mentioned those 3P marketplaces a minute ago. That's what these 3P marketplaces look like, and that's who's really going to drive future growth. So if you reflect on how different our world is, our sales organizations in particular have totally different terms of engagement than they used to, right? You had this brick and mortar stores where you sit across a table from someone and negotiate on product, price, placement, those sorts of things. And that was true even 5 years ago for the most part with a customer like Amazon. But what's happened over time is the data and the algorithms start to work, and we're working with humans less and we're working with algorithms more. And ultimately where we're headed is that suppliers are working with what we call algorithm stores, as well as e-commerce. If you work with Amazon, you already know this concept maybe of hands off the wheel. It's harder and harder to get in touch with someone every single day. And we think the global leaders, whether they're store-based or e-commerce, who are looking more and more like one another every day, that's kind of the picture that we're going to be operating in. And so what that means for us as a business, as an industry, is that tomorrow belongs to those who really embrace that world. And so there's a massive amount of change on the horizon, a massive amount of change that you're already experiencing. I've highlighted a couple here, right? We know there's new routes to market and new competitors, whether that's retailers or brands. Obviously, there's massive profitability challenges, but we're also having to make decisions faster. We're having to plan quicker. A lot of that is data-driven. And this is disruptive to the way our organizations are set up, right? Sales organizations across e-commerce and store-based don't often coordinate in the way they should. Supply chain is hugely impacted by these things. There's new skill sets that we need in these organizations that maybe we don't have. But perhaps most importantly, there's new measures of success. The way we used to evaluate success, we really can't do that anymore because the game has changed, the business models have changed, and the way we have to go to market has changed. And so you may ask yourself kind of where to start, right? And that brings us to the purpose of today's webinar. What should you be looking for as in an e-commerce partner, really? And where you start is obviously with strategy. And so formerly what you may have known as Planet Retail R&G, now called Edge Retail Insight. That's what Edge Retail Insight does, right? They work with e-commerce teams, sales and commercial teams, and even strategy and insight teams to help address and answer questions like, where's the growth? How do I get closer to my retailers? How do I partner better with my retail customers? What do I need to win? What do I need to do in this new environment? How do I tackle these challenges? Big issues like working with third-party marketplaces, navigating cross-border commerce challenges, even reworking your in-store business. And then how do I keep up with this pace of change? There's so much changing constantly. I don't have the day-to-day to do it. And ultimately, that's where the work starts, right? How do we set a strategy? But of course, the devil's in the details. So I'm going to pass it to Danny now, and he's going to talk about some of those details and the rest of the Edge business. So Danny, over to you.
Doug, appreciate that. And as we move over, we could advance the slide. All right. Great, there we go. So as we think about the capabilities that you should be looking for, and really this has a lot to do with how we've built the Edge organization and the acquisitions that have been carefully made over the last few years. We really built this because we believe that this is what manufacturers and retailers are looking to have answered for them, and really are looking for one partner who can help do that. And it's really what this is, what this is all about. And the questions that are at the top of most people's minds are, what's my strategy and is it working? How am I performing against that strategy and against my competitors? Tell me why and how do I improve? And so as you think about that as a virtuous cycle, if you set your strategy, you set your shelf and your trade planning, and then you measure your performance, it becomes this cycle of then once again going back, reevaluating and updating your strategy as you go. So, for example, if we start with the performance piece of it, you think about how you are performing in your sales versus your competitors. You might see a scenario where, hey, my growth looks great. I'm growing, double digits year over year. But once you have the full picture of market share, you versus your competitors, you might actually realize that your share is growing slower than the category, meaning your competitors are growing faster than you. So often it's not enough just to know your own sales, but you also need to know whether or not you're capturing your full fair share or more of what's happening in the category in general. And so as part of that, we look at a case study like we have here on snack bars, where we've seen trends to where the digital native brands are growing at a faster pace than some of the legacy brands, and having that insight and understanding what's happening can be hugely insightful. So having a solution which we formerly as One-Click Retail and is now being called Edge Market Share helps you understand your performance in the context of the market, how you're doing versus competitors, how your traffic and conversion is optimized as well. Once you know your market share, then it becomes a question of how do you improve, and that gets all about the digital shelf and really focusing on the 6 Ps, which if you've been on former Clavis webinars, you've heard us speak about before. The idea here is that if you really understand what's in your sphere of control, it's about what product and assortment you set up with the retailer, where it is within the retailer's hierarchy or navigation, the cost of goods to which you provide to the retailer, your trade plan, and then of course, very importantly, your page content, which is all about search optimization as well as conversion optimization. When you have those set, you measure the results in the form of how much traffic is going to the page, how well you're converting, and ultimately what your sales and share is. So when we have all of that working in concert, you're making great decisions and changes at the shelf with those first 5 Ps, and you're driving the virtuous cycle of traffic, conversion, sales, and share. And that's part of, again, why Clavis Insight was acquired and incorporated into this new Edge proposition, which we're now calling Edge Digital Shelf. And it's all about having the insight to understand how to make sure you're maximizing your in-stock, you've maximized distribution, you've maximized discoverability via search, conversion moments like ratings and review, and so on. And going one level deeper on that then is your trade planning, all around price and promotion. And we know that very deep insights are necessary here. So optimizing trade spend is really critical and is a very important decision in the minds of the shopper. So as we look at price and promotion, one of our most recent acquisitions is BrandView, who are well known for their deep promotion analytics capabilities, measuring ROI, as well as planning future promotions and doing that in the context of promotional calendars, what's happened in the category, what competitors are doing, what your overall share of the promotions in the category are as well. So when we take all of those 4 together, this is what we've really leaned in with a significant investment, at the Ascential level at this point, hundreds of millions of dollars to build what we believe is what brands and retailers are looking for in their ideal e-commerce analytics and advisory solution. Market share to help you understand if you're growing faster than the competition. Digital shelf to understand how to fix it. The retail insight part that Doug talked through around how to optimize the strategy to accelerate your share, and then that price and promotion piece, which is so important for optimizing your trade spend for both your profitability and retailer margin. As we brought Edge together, our vision is to answer these questions to help our clients win in an e-commerce-driven world with single points of contact and a single insights and account team that really understands your business needs. We have, a significant amount of expertise, both technological and human, now under one roof, more data coverage than you could find from any individual supplier, leading industry experts now rallying behind our clients' businesses, and again, that one point of contact to work with across all of these needs. And then the last thing, we underpin this with advisory and education, and some of that is paid, and some of it is a fee-based event, and some of it is things like today's webinar. Last week we had our hackathon in London, and there was a hackathon in Seattle a few weeks prior. That's hugely helpful for those who call on Amazon and are looking for help on how to really lead the charge with their company to build new models and sort of hack the system, both their own and Amazon, so they can accelerate that growth. We also have a range of services around individual one-to-one consulting and advisory, executive education, and so on. Okay, so that's basically an overview of what we believe is what you should be looking for in your solution provider. Obviously, there's a wrapper around this, which is our own hypothesis that we've invested in, of course, with our own proposition. But I think that regardless of who your suppliers and who you're working with, those are the critical questions you want to be thinking about as you're working with those providers and really helping to focus your resources and priorities on how you're driving your business. And with that, I will hand it back over to Rob. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Doug and Danny. Great insights. We've now entered the Q&A portion of the program. All participants are on mute for the call, but if you have any questions, you can ask them by entering them into the Q&A box. I can take the first question. Yes, all participants will receive a copy of the webinar recording within the next 2 days. And Danny, a question for you that just came in. What are the best ways to justify a spend in e-commerce to upper management?
This is probably the #1 question, especially for those who are earlier in their e-commerce curve, embracing e-commerce curve, because at face value, the P&L for e-commerce looks very upside down. The resources that are required both in people and capabilities seem outsized in the early days relative to the incremental revenue. And you may be getting questions like, if I have $1 to spend in brick and mortar Walmart or $1 to spend on Walmart.com, where should I put the dollar? And the answer is actually yes. Because if you think about this through the shopper's point of view, they don't really understand brick and mortar versus .com. It's become completely seamless, primarily through mobile, and they're expecting to have that consistent experience everywhere they go, using e-commerce very often as the shopping window that then influences the conversion in store. As Doug said up front, brick and mortar isn't going anywhere anytime soon, but it's increasingly e-commerce driven, with more than half of all brick and mortar and total retail sales influenced at some point in the path to purchase by a touch of e-commerce. So even if the conversion and the sale doesn't happen online, that investment has to be there in that online presence in order to drive conversion offline. And so the way to think about e-commerce as you're justifying the spend is part sales, but also part media, part marketing. This is a critical shopping window into the overall path to purchase that shoppers are using to make informed decisions.
Great, thank you, Danny. Doug, a question just came in for you. Is your team finding different e-commerce priorities for different categories? Examples, focusing on different areas of e-commerce content, promotions, and supply chain infrastructure.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. The answer is certainly yes, and a lot of this has to do with category maturity online, right? Where you have book, music, video at 70 or 80% and food and beverage at 1 or 2%, depending on the market. And so obviously that has a huge role in both the investment required and the sophistication that you need online. The other part of that is what we call like weight density ratio. Basically means how attractive are some of these products online. It's really hard to ship cases of water to someone's door and make money on it. And so what we're seeing in categories like that, let's say a lot of grocery categories, lots of heavy products that aren't that expensive, you see much more investment in in things like click and collect models, because we, as do many of these customers and people playing in this category, believe that that is going to be the, at least midterm, in the midterm, the successful place that you can actually make some money online. Whereas if you compare that to, let's say, health and beauty or consumer electronics, which are massively penetrated online already, there's already more competitors online. Pricing tends to be really competitive in a lot of these categories online. And so you see much more investment in, for example, third-party marketplaces, much more investment in unique SKUs for online that avoids channel conflicts with other store-based channels. And so certainly there's really big differences based on where your category currently sits. I think the thing that is similar really across the board is that 2017 and certainly in 2018, we've seen lots of evidence that the organizations have finally planted their flag and say, okay, this is a thing that's definitely happening. This is the thing we need to take seriously, and now it's time to upskill. Now it's time to invest to make sure we can win in this e-commerce driven world. And so you'll see much more investment in particularly product. How do we design products, packaging, supply chains that can get products to consumers as efficiently as they possibly can? Because the elephant in the room remains, like Danny mentioned, that P&L online. And so no matter where you are, that's probably priority one for a lot of customers. But certainly the competitive environment is really different depending on the category you play in.
Thank you, Doug. Appreciate the insights. Danny, a question just came in for you. If we are just getting started with an e-commerce measurement program, is there a certain KPI we should focus on?
Yeah, at its most fundamental level, in stock has to be the first port of call. Because nothing else matters if your product isn't in stock. And it seems so obvious, but the reality is if you're getting started, the lowest hanging fruit is going to be getting those products in stock. The next point from there is then taking a look at that assortment to make sure that your best sellers are set up with the retailer. Now, the quick call out there is your best sellers online are rarely the same as the best sellers offline. So there may be some analytics you can pull in from either other online retailer insight or else just knowing what your general horse codes are in the world of brick and mortar and to focus there. But that really is the first KPI to take a look at, because you've got to get that product in stock first and foremost before you can even get out of the starting gate on any of the other KPIs.
Great, thanks, Danny. Danny and Doug, question came in for both of you. What do you think e-commerce has in store for us in 2019?
I'll go ahead and go ahead, Danny.
Go ahead, Doug. No, okay. You go ahead, Doug. You take it first.
Sure. Yeah. So the numbers obviously indicate much more growth for one, a greater share of growth. I think what it also has in store is much more consolidation, because really there's only a few winners out there, right? Danny mentioned the P&L, but also the outsized investments required. And so there's a few leaders out there: Amazon, Alibaba, Walmart, a few others that have really planted their flag in this way, and will continue to drive growth both online and in store. And for the others that are behind, I'm not going to say they're disappearing, but a lot of retailers are going to be facing really tough choices about, okay, can I afford to keep up with this pace of innovation and this pace of investment? And so you'll see many more partnerships, this term that we call co-opetition, which is traditionally what you might consider a competitor, but leaning on some of their strengths and you in turn providing them some of yours to better compete. So I think that's where we're going to see a lot more of that. And from the brand side, the supplier side, you're going to see more direct to consumer, more brands tapping into this idea of digital native brands online, whether that's acquisitions or whether that's kind of new product launches themselves that they run almost like a little digital native startup. And ultimately, the industry really start to embrace not only that e-commerce is here to stay, but really start to understand the scope of what it takes to win in an e-commerce driven world. And so both retailers and brands have some tough choices ahead of them, but the winners have massive growth opportunities as well, because you saw some of those figures we talked about up front. It is In some sense, e-commerce is democratized, but in another sense, it is kind of a winner-take-all or a few winners-take-all environment, and so you'll see some big winners as well.
Yeah, I would echo what Doug said and just add a couple points to it. We're finally seeing retailers figure out that they can't just copy Amazon, just have a basic e-commerce website that sort of mirrors what they have in store. That each retailer really needs to own their own identity and understand what their equity is with their shoppers. So Walmart is the best example in the last couple of years since the acquisition of Jet, where they've really gotten very focused on developing their own definition of what e-commerce means for Walmart, rapid expansion of click and collect, acquisitions that allow them to go more segmented so that they can maintain their core Walmart equity and identity while still going after other segments. Today there was yesterday or today there was an article about CVS rolling out a program that sounds quite a bit like Prime, basically a loyalty program to help bring loyalty to the store through online, including prescription pickup, which is an area that Amazon's just getting into with their recent acquisition of PillPack. Point being, each retailer figuring out what e-commerce is going to mean to them and how to be as relevant. And so for brands, it's really about how do you help the retailers with that process, with that journey, and provide them the help and insight so you can be a part of that. The one other note I would just make on the flip side of what's happening in 2019, there's also voice as a critical trend for next year. Right now it's an interesting footnote. I think we'll see some really good innovation in 2019 that helps that actually become truly relevant from a revenue perspective. And then the last thing is all about data. And so what we've seen a rising trend across most of our clients is either they have an internal tool for pooling their data through some kind of a BI tool, or they're in the process of building or considering building one. And that's something that just becomes more important as you have your own internal data plus data from suppliers like Edge, being able to bring that all together and having the APIs and the infrastructure integration to make that happen so you can get to richer insight. So those are probably the big three that I would highlight for 2019.
Thank you, Doug and Danny. Doug, a question just came in for you. What parts of the organization should we seek to engage when setting our e-commerce strategy?
Yeah, great question. There's obviously lots of questions about how to set up an organization for e-commerce, whether it's kind of regionally distributed or centralized. There's pros and cons to a lot of these things. Danny mentioned a big one, which is data. There's that skill set must exist inside or supporting e-commerce operations, because these things are going to only get more complex and more faster moving. Beyond the traditional account management, insights, sales kind of organization, though, I think the big one is supply chain. We still see far too many organizations that don't speak enough or collaborate with their supply chain teams when setting e-commerce strategy. And what happens when you don't do that is either that supply chain team doesn't quite understand why, for example, pack size or packaging becomes really important, right? You hear these examples of, sorry, we're just not going to do that. It's like, well, actually, if we don't do that with our packaging, it disqualifies us from selling on Amazon, right? So you can have some really extreme examples, but as brands and retailers work to get more efficient and more profitable online, a lot of it does start with packaging, pack sizes, and assortment, and without including that supply chain expertise that can actually go act and make something happen, it's really hard to drive some of the change you need to really win with a customer like Amazon compared to a lot of the store-based customers. And then the last one would probably be collaborating with those store-based customers, because e-commerce asks you to do some uncomfortable and new and different things, and sometimes that will create issues either with kind of create conflicts with other store-based channels and the strategies that those account teams have set. So I'd say supply chain for sure, data as well as the second one, and then just breaking down those silos to make sure people are on the same page.
Thank you, Doug. Danny, question for you that just came in. Once we have a measurement program in place, how do we share the data across the business so our performance is optimized as close to real time as possible?
There's a couple different ways as if you're looking to share that information. I mean, part of it is taking information from from the portals and products, your product solutions that you're using, and whether it's exporting the images or taking screenshots, whatever it may be, so that you can keep them updated. There's also a number of brands we work with who share access to those tools, so that there's regular so they can access it themselves. But another really excellent tool is just generally alerts functions, where you set up rules within those systems in order to alert those key partners of yours if there's something they need to know about. Now, typically that has more to do with something's gone out of stock or there's a pricing change, but it just depends on the type of information that you're looking to share. But very often it's about setting up rules and ways of regular checkpoints of sharing that information based on what's in those product solutions that you made.
Thank you, Danny. We're coming up against time here, so we have a bunch of questions that come in. We'll have time for two more, and we'll make sure to follow up with everybody after today's session with the additional questions that have been asked. Doug, question for you that just came in. What should our Walmart team be thinking about with their digital initiatives for this upcoming year?
Yeah, good question. As Danny mentioned, Walmart is embracing the idea of not being Amazon, but leveraging those physical assets, these 3,000 or 4,000 stores around the US and thousands more around the world, to create an e-commerce or an omnichannel strategy that they can execute more effectively. I think they are still they're going to continue to test fulfillment and last mile, right? They do not have the fulfillment network that Amazon does to get everything to your doorstep in 2 days as efficiently as Amazon can. And so those stores are going to play a huge role. I think click and collect will continue to grow, and we've seen a lot of growth in that already over the last 2 years. You'll see more automation in the back end to try to make things more efficient, both in fulfillment centers, distribution centers, and potentially dark stores or even automated pickup stores. And so from a brand perspective there, you need to be wary of what the demands it places on your packaging in particular. And then you're going to see Jet probably continue to be the testing ground for a lot of digital initiatives. You saw they did kind of a relaunch just a couple of months ago, and really focused in kind of the New York City area now, testing their strategy basically with an urban shopper, which is obviously not the entirety of the Walmart shopper base. And so you'll see a lot more test and learn. I think click and collect would be the standout for me, particularly if you play in grocery categories. If you play in non-food categories or more aspirational categories, then I think content on the new Walmart site has a really significant impact here, because they're clearly leaning into this idea of online experience, destination. They've added some of these niche vertical brands to add to that. And then they'll keep building out that third-party marketplace. And that's probably the one area that I have the most question marks about, because it starts to raise really interesting challenges around curation and assortment and how it impacts their traditional suppliers.
Thank you, Doug. We have time for one more question. Again, we will make sure to follow up with all additional questions after today's session. This question, Danny, we'll ask you first, and then Doug, please jump in for any additional color on this one. How about our international e-commerce strategy? What are some best practices to consider? Should we develop new SKUs from different markets, and what are the barriers that we should expect to face?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely an important strategy there in terms of having SKUs that are e-commerce only, and then certainly by region, depending on where the products are local. There's probably a couple different layers to that question. If I don't answer this, I'm happy to follow up afterwards with whoever it is if you have further questions. But a couple things that I would keep in mind is if you're starting a global e-commerce program, often what we see is resourcing at a centralized level to start. Usually it's a 2 or 3 year program where they build the capability, or what we call the muscle, the understanding of how to optimize e-commerce for all regions, and make the capabilities and knowledge available to the regions almost as a service. And then as the e-commerce capability builds, the revenue builds, and the business case builds, it eventually can then be pushed out to the regions. I would say those that were at the leading edge of e-commerce 3 or 4 years ago are now at the phase of where they're really starting to push this down into the local markets. And then there's others that are sort of in the middle, and some are just getting started. The other dynamic that's worth calling out in Europe is the dynamic of cross-border trade, and keeping in mind that any strategy to attempt to keep product within a border can be really challenged based on particularly Amazon's model of how they can distribute and redistribute inventory if proper guidelines aren't set around that. So often in the case of Europe, it makes sense to think about a cross-border program as opposed to one country at a time. Asia is a completely different strategy because of the predominant marketplace model. You may find that your brands are actually being sold by 30 or 40 retailers through Tmall or otherwise, and needing to work with all of them to help optimize content and make sure that the brand equity is represented properly, in addition to having your own brand store and being able to sell directly to consumer there. So those are just a few of the factors to think about when it comes to global. But if there's any more specific questions, feel free to send them in and we can follow up afterwards.
Yeah, and to add to that, Danny, we actually just published a big piece of research on some of the challenges and solutions to cross-border in particular. And that's probably one of the big things to be aware of. As Danny mentioned, there are leaks. You cannot control, it's just things make it across borders, whether it's retailer-driven, consumer-driven, wholesaler, distributor-driven. And so there's certainly lots, it feels like you're playing whack-a-mole sometimes. And so there are things you can do to defend against that. I'd say a couple other things to mention or to highlight. With someone like Amazon, you start to see more organizations trying to move to a global negotiation model as opposed to a market by market, or at least a regional negotiation model, because you may be able to lean on one another for both best practices across markets and kind of get the best terms as you go through that. When you think about all these different geographies, with very few exceptions, Amazon's the leader in 10 markets or so, but outside of that, the top e-commerce players, the top e-commerce customers in each country are going to be different. The top business models, whether it's click and collect or home delivery or pickup or variations within those things, are going to be different. And so it's hard to execute a one-size-fits-all strategy. But with that said, you can do some things, simple things like packaging with multiple languages on it that gives you the ability to send stuff across Europe or across geographies, right? There are little things that you can do, but as Danny said, there's lots of layers here. So if you do have, we're happy to kind of continue this conversation offline, follow up if you have some more questions.
Thank you, Danny and Doug. With that, we've reached our time limit for today. We'd like again to thank everybody for joining today's session, as well as Danny and Doug, of course, for their time. A survey will appear as you exit the webinar. please do take the time to let us know your thoughts on the content. As a thank you for joining us today, we'd like to include a recent white paper that we just published. So we'll make sure to send that to you upon completion of the survey. And you can also use this as a way to request more information on any of our capabilities reviewed here today. So with that, again, a big thank you for everybody joining us today, and we look forward to working with you in the future and being in touch.